Welcome to Part 3, where we continue to explore underemployment in 2 additional regions. We will also look into why this crisis exists. We'll explore the deeper structural drivers, from education mismatches to automation and demographic shifts, and what they mean for the future of youth and mission in the majority world. Let's get into it. Let's begin in East Asia and the Pacific, where many youth find themselves between formalization and frustration. In East Asia and the Pacific, excluding OECD countries like South Korea and the unique case of China, youth underemployment patterns are mixed. Some countries in Southeast Asia, like Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines, have undergone partial industrialization and have significant formal sectors, while others still have a high agricultural base and informality. Overall, youth unemployment in East and Southeast Asia is moderate, around 10 to 15% on average pre-pandemic, but underemployment is still widespread. In Indonesia, for example, official youth unemployment is typically 15 to 20%, yet the underemployment rate, the share of employed who want more hours, is also in double digits. Many Indonesian youth work in the informal sector. About 70% of total employment in Indonesia is informal, and youth are likely at the higher end of that. Common scenarios include urban youth working in ride-sharing or delivery gigs, often not fully occupied, and rural youth engaging in part-time farm work or migrating seasonally to cities. In the Philippines, underemployment is a well-recognized issue. The country regularly reports an underemployment rate for all ages of around 15 to 20%. As of 2024, about 12% of Filipino employed youth were underemployed, wanting additional work hours. Many young Filipinos take whatever job is available, such as short-term call center contracts, informal retail jobs, or intermittent construction work, meaning they are employed, but not stably so. The Philippines also has a high rate of educated workers in jobs outside their field, a skills mismatch driven by a surplus of college graduates relative to local industry demand and partially alleviated by overseas employment. For example, many nurses and engineers emigrate. Vietnam stands out for its relatively low official unemployment, under 7% for youth in 2023, and a large manufacturing sector that absorbs youth. Yet even Vietnam has a lot of informal employment. Rural youth, when not in factories, often do informal service jobs or help in family farms or shops. Other Southeast Asian nations like Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar have very high youth underemployment as their economies are less diversified. Cambodia's garment sector is a major youth employer, but beyond that, jobs are informal or agricultural. One critical driver in East Asia is urbanization. Large cities like Jakarta, Manila, and Bangkok attract youth seeking work, but not all find formal jobs. Many end up in slums working odd jobs, an urban underemployment that is sometimes less visible than rural poverty, but equally challenging. For instance, a young migrant from rural Java to Jakarta might end up driving a motorbike taxi and earning just enough to survive day to day, aspiring eventually for something better. The Pacific Islands, like Fiji and Papua New Guinea, face small formal sectors and many youth in subsistence or informal activities, effectively underemployed given low productivity. Within East Asia, it's also worth noting that China is excluded from this analysis by design. But if it were included, China's youth unemployment has surged recently, over 20% in 2023, due to slowdown and mismatch. Yet underemployment in rural China is also significant. In many ways, some Southeast Asian countries mirror earlier stages of China's development, but with slower formal job growth. One trend in East Asia is the growth of the gig economy, which provides some income opportunities for youth, but often without stability. Platforms for food delivery, ride-hailing, freelancing online, like graphic design or virtual assistants, have proliferated. While these gigs can reduce outright unemployment, a young person can earn something, they often leave youth underemployed or earning below what they'd need for a decent life. However, they also represent potential if harnessed. For example, with better social protection for gig workers or training to help youth move up from gig work to more secure work. Missiological reflection. In the East Asian context, where technology and gig work are common, Christian ministries could innovate by providing co-working spaces, entrepreneurship training, or even incubating small social enterprises for youth. Churches in cities like Manila or Jakarta are beginning to offer job placement assistance and business as mission ventures, such as cafes or tech startups, that employ and mentor youth, integrating faith and work. Such creative approaches can be a beacon of hope in societies where young people otherwise feel left behind by the formal economy. Now we turn to Latin America and the Caribbean, where high informality persists despite middle-income status. Latin America and the Caribbean present a paradox. The region has relatively high levels of education and middle-income economies, yet youth unemployment and underemployment remain stubborn problems. The average youth unemployment in Latin America and the Caribbean was about 16% in 2022, which improved to 13.4% by 2023 as economies rebounded. But this still means over 1 in 8 youth in the labor force are jobless. Moreover, unemployment spiked dramatically during economic crises. For instance, youth unemployment soared above 20% in some countries during the COVID-19 pandemic and remains elevated in places like Colombia and Costa Rica. The more pervasive issue, however, is informal employment. Across Latin America and the Caribbean, about 55 to 60% of young workers are in informal jobs. This includes jobs like street vending, informal construction, domestic work, or working in micro-enterprises that evade registration. For example, in Peru, nearly 80% of 15 to 24-year-olds work informally, according to ILO estimates. In much of Central America, the rate is similarly high. Even comparatively advanced economies like Mexico and Brazil have large informal sectors that entrap youth. Mexico, for instance, has a youth informal employment rate around 60%, with many youths working in small family businesses or as informal salespeople. Ninis, Spanish shorthand for NEET, ni trabajan ni estudian, are a big concern in Latin America and the Caribbean. A significant share of youth, often 20% or more, are not in school or formal work. Many of these ninis are effectively underemployed or engaged in illicit or informal activities. For instance, some young men get pulled into gang economies in Central America due to lack of jobs, and young women might be doing unpaid domestic work or early motherhood without employment. This idle or unproductive pool of youth is a social time bomb in countries like Honduras, El Salvador, or even parts of Brazil. Structural issues like mismatch and lack of skills also surface in Latin America. Employers often complain of not finding youth with the right technical skills, even as many youth are unemployed, a skills mismatch partly due to education quality gaps. Meanwhile, those with higher education sometimes emigrate to the US or Europe if opportunities are lacking at home. The Caribbean in particular sees high emigration of skilled youth. A positive aspect in Latin America is that many countries have made progress in expanding education, and there is a relatively vibrant entrepreneurial culture in urban areas. Yet bureaucratic barriers and weak job creation by the formal private sector mean that a lot of educated youth still end up either unemployed or taking jobs in call centers, retail, or the gig economy that underutilize their full potential. Some specific country examples. Colombia has a youth unemployment rate above 20%, and many youth in informal work or conflict-affected areas where legal jobs are scarce. Bolivia and Guatemala have extremely high informal employment, often over 80% for youth, given large indigenous and rural populations engaged in subsistence livelihoods. Haiti, one of the poorest in the region, has the vast majority of youth scraping by in a shattered economy, epitomizing underemployment. On the other hand, Chile, though OECD, has a much lower informal rate and can absorb more youth into formal jobs, showing what stronger institutions can achieve over time. Latin America also faces the emerging challenge of technological displacement, like automation in manufacturing, but also an opportunity with nearshoring. Some U.S. companies are moving production from Asia closer to home, which could create manufacturing jobs for Mexican, Central American, or Caribbean youth if harnessed properly. So the trajectory can still change depending on policy and global trends. Missiological reflection. The high number of ninis and informally employed youth in Latin America calls for the church to be actively engaged in what one might call mission on the margins, reaching out to disengaged youth, providing training, purpose, and community. For example, churches in gang-prone neighborhoods of Honduras have started vocational programs, carpentry, automotive repair, coupled with discipleship to draw youth away from crime and into productive lives. Additionally, Christian NGOs in Latin America and the Caribbean often focus on entrepreneurship as a solution, offering microloans and business mentoring to young people with ideas, reflecting an understanding that in the absence of formal jobs, innovation and small businesses can be a godsend to improve livelihoods. It is evident that youth underemployment is the common denominator across regions, even if the surface symptoms differ. Unemployment versus informality. Whether it's an educated Tunisian grad sitting idle at home or a Nigerian village youth farming a tiny plot, the end result is a vast underutilization of young people's energy and talents. Each region has its nuances, but all are far from the goal of full, productive youth employment. As the heat map of underemployment shows, the greatest needs are in Africa and South Asia, but even middle-income regions are not spared. And now we move into structural drivers of youth underemployment. Understanding the roots of youth underemployment requires looking beyond immediate labor market conditions to the broader structural forces shaping economies. Several key drivers have emerged over the past decade and will continue into the next that fundamentally affect the quantity and quality of jobs available to young people in the majority world. These include technological change, particularly automation and AI, the changing currents of globalization, demographic pressures, and educational mismatches. Let's examine automation and AI, the technological wildcard. Technology has always been a double-edged sword for employment, creating new industries and opportunities while rendering some jobs obsolete. Today, the rapid advance of automation and artificial intelligence is poised to disrupt labor markets globally. Youth, who often seek entry-level positions, could be particularly impacted if those positions are automated away or if they lack the digital skills to seize new roles. According to an IMF analysis in 2024, almost 40% of jobs globally are exposed to AI in some form. Advanced economies face greater immediate automation risk, up to 60% of jobs affected in coming years, while emerging economies face a more gradual effect. Indeed, AI today can perform certain high-skill tasks like coding or data analysis, which puts many white-collar jobs in rich countries at risk, whereas developing countries with more manual labor jobs might not see robots replacing farmers or street vendors soon. However, there is a real concern that developing countries might be left behind, lacking the infrastructure or skilled workforce to benefit from AI. They could see advanced nations pull further ahead. Over time, as AI becomes more accessible, it will affect developing markets too, potentially leapfrogging into service sectors. For example, AI-driven call center bots could replace offshore call center agents. A stark projection from Goldman Sachs in 2023 estimated that up to 300 million jobs worldwide could be affected by AI and automation, roughly 18% of all work globally. The expectation is that clerical, administrative, and routine cognitive roles are most vulnerable. For the majority world, this raises alarms. Many hoped-for modern jobs for youth, such as BPO call center jobs, basic programming, or repetitive manufacturing assembly, might not materialize in the numbers expected because AI and robots could fill them. For instance, the Philippines and India rely heavily on call centers and back-office outsourcing, employing millions of young graduates. The advent of AI chatbots threatens to automate a portion of those jobs, potentially slowing the growth of this youth-employing sector. On the other hand, technology also creates new fields and demand for new skills. The digital economy offers avenues for youth entrepreneurship, e.g., e-commerce, online content creation, and gig work, like freelancing on global platforms. In Africa, the spread of mobile technology has enabled entirely new job categories, like mobile money agents and online freelancers. The World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs 2023 report actually predicts a net positive globally from tech trends by 2027, about 69 million new jobs created versus 83 million eliminated, a churn of 23% of jobs. But crucially, these new jobs, like data scientists, AI technicians, and green economy jobs, require skills that many youth in developing countries currently lack. Without major upskilling, there is a risk of a skills divide, where the minority of well-educated urban youth capture tech opportunities and the rest fall further into informality. A country spotlight, Bangladesh, with its huge garment manufacturing sector, over 4 million workers, many of them young women, illustrates the technology driver. Automation in textile production, like sewing robots, could threaten thousands of low-skilled jobs over the next decade. Unless those youth can be absorbed in higher-value tasks or other sectors, underemployment could worsen. However, if Bangladesh successfully upskills its youth, training them in advanced machining or design, it could move up the value chain. In summary, AI and automation will reshape the landscape of youth employment. The outcome is not predetermined. Policies around education and tech adoption will influence whether the net effect is positive or negative, but it is clear that business as usual won't continue. Youth entering the workforce must increasingly contend with digital transformation. And that wraps up part 3. As we've seen, these structural forces, automation, global realignments, demographic shifts, and skills mismatches are not just economic trends. They're defining the future of an entire generation. But what happens next? In the following chapter, we'll explore possible futures and scenarios for youth underemployment by 2035, and the critical choices that could shape those outcomes. Stay tuned.